Hi everyone, welcome to week 11 of Parenting Inside Out. This week, we're going to be focusing on parenting adolescents and healthy teen partner relationships. Some takeaway messages include, adolescents have new cognitive abilities that allow them to think about their own thoughts. The developmental task of adolescents is to use these newly emerging thinking abilities to separate themselves from their parents and to establish themselves as independent young adults. Parents can help their adolescents develop into responsible young adults by having consistent family rules, continuing to monitor and supervise, providing rewards for following and consequences for not following those rules. A sample learning goal could be, I would like to identify some age-appropriate rules and consequences for my teenager. You can take a second and write down your learning goal for today. One of the most challenging parts of adolescence is the tremendous amount of peer pressure. Teens are pressured by other teens to engage in a variety of risky behaviors, including drug and alcohol use and sexual activity. I want you to think about what it's like to be a teenager today and the difficult situations they face. There's many decisions teens need to make about which path in life they would like to take. Some of the most important decisions are about whether or not they'll have sex and perhaps become a teen parent, use substances and perhaps get hooked on one or more, commit crimes and perhaps end up incarcerated, or stay in school and go on to college. On worksheet 11.1.1 in your yellow workbook, you're going to write down your guesses for how many teenagers you think engage in risky activities. You can make your guess in the following way. Out of a group of 10 teens, how many do you think do the activity? For example, if I said eat fast food like hamburgers and fries in the last 30 days, out of 10 teens, how many do you think have done that? So if you said 8, that would mean 80% of most teens had eaten fast food in the last 30 days. What you're going to do now is go through this worksheet and assign a number to each of the behaviors that represents your guess of how many teens out of 10 has practiced that behavior. So you can now pause the video and fill out this worksheet. We're now going to take a look at the real numbers. 3 in 10 teens drank alcohol in the past 30 days. 2 in 10 teens binge drank in the last 30 days. 2 in 10 teens rode in a car with a driver under the influence. 7 in 10 teens texted while driving. 1 in 10 smoked cigarettes in the last 30 days. 2 in 10 vaped in the last 30 days. 2 in 10 used marijuana in the past 30 days. 4 out of 10 had sex by the age of 18. 1 out of 10 were considered to be medically obese. 4 out of 10 spent at least 3 hours on a school day playing video games. 2 out of 10 spent at least 3 hours on a school day watching TV. 2 out of 10 carried a weapon, such as a gun, knife, or club in the past 30 days. 4 out of 10 were cyberbullied in the last year. 3 out of 10 felt sad or hopeless in the last 30 days. And 3 out of 10 have been arrested by age 18. Many of these numbers have dropped in the past few years. Fewer teens are smoking and teen pregnancy is down, but the number of teens who have been arrested has gone up, in spite of the fact that overall crime rates are down. The good news is that parents can have a big influence on whether their teens engage in these behaviors. Parents can make a difference with their teens. Today we're going to talk about how. If we were all in class together, we would now take this time to get a little bit artistic. I would have you guys each get out your colored pencils or markers and draw a picture of what you believe a typical teenager would look like. And that would also include things like developmental tasks they're working on, or behaviors, or just kind of typical maybe attitudes or tendencies of teenagers. And I'd have you refer to week 4 when we talked about the different stages of development, and we'd be focusing on stage 6, which is 12 to 19 years. I would encourage you to do this on your own. This is not going to be an assignment that's required, but it can be really helpful for you, especially if you do have teenage kids at home right now. So you can take a second to do that if you would like. Adolescents have developed into abstract thinkers. This means that most teenagers are quite capable of thinking about their own thoughts. This is why we see them begin to challenge parents and authority figures. Their developmental task is to distinguish themselves as separate from their parents as they prepare to live out in the real world as independent adults. They may express this separation by choosing different ideas, beliefs, values, hair and clothing styles, interests and friends. The task for parents is allowing adolescents to separate while still providing supervision, guidance, structure, and love. If you have a teenager at home right now, it'd be helpful for you to think about, have you noticed any of these new behaviors in them? Maybe they're trying to show a little bit more independence, or they're speaking their opinion or speaking their mind a little bit more. Take a second and reflect on that if you have kids who are in this developmental stage. Don't forget what we learned in week 4 on brain development. Adolescent brains continue to develop into young adulthood. Teen brains aren't fully mature in their ability to make good decisions and control their impulses. Alcohol and drugs, including nicotine, can negatively impact a teen's brain development. Adolescents still need you to set limits and establish rules. They need you to provide consequences, supervision, and guidance. Supervision and monitoring are an important way to protect your teen against wandering. Wandering out in the community with no adult supervision is the greatest predictor of a risky behavior in adolescence. When children wander with no adult supervision, they generally hook up with peers who are also without adult supervision. Together, they often can get into trouble. Of course, teens today can also wander in the online community, which presents whole new challenges to the parents' job of supervising their teens. Adolescents may look like adults, but they don't yet have adult brains. I think that's one thing that is really important to remember. We talked about it a couple weeks ago when we were thinking about making sure we're identifying our kids' age correctly, even when they're younger. And sometimes if, kids are really tall or they're really mature, we can sometimes overestimate how old they are, especially when they're younger. This can be the same for teenagers. They can appear to look like adults or in some ways even act like adults, but that does not mean that their adult brains are fully developed. This means they still need the influence and supervision that parents provide. Your role at this stage of development is to know what your children are doing, including what they're doing online and on their cell phones, who they're with, where they are, whether there's an adult supervision available, and when they will be home. We shouldn't try to control all of our teens' choices, but should provide structure by laying out some non-negotiable rules. We talked about rules a little bit in the past few weeks as well, and so I want you to take a second and think about in your household, especially for your teenagers if you have them, or in the future if your kids are still young, what are some non-negotiable rules that you might have for them? You can take a second and brainstorm that. Whenever you have a rule or give an instruction, you can have two results. Your child either complies, which means they obey, or they don't. We can define compliance as beginning to do the request within 10 to 15 seconds. Non-compliance is not doing the behavior in 10 to 15 seconds. And studies show that most children comply about 70% of the time. So it's a little unrealistic for us to think that our kids are necessarily going to comply 100% of the time. That could be a goal that we have, but studies do show that it's pretty average for them to comply at least around 70% of the time. It's also important to remember that compliance isn't always jumping right up to do what the parent says to do. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes compliance means acknowledging the parental request within 10 to 15 seconds and engaging in polite negotiation regarding their request. If, for example, your teen might acknowledge your request, but then ask permission to first finish what he's working on, which he thinks will take about 30 minutes, if he then completes the chore, is it still considered compliance or non-compliance? You can take a second to think about that. I would say it's compliance because he acknowledged your request and worked with you to make a plan that will work for both of you. He respectfully acknowledged the request and used appropriate negotiation skills. At this point, you have the option to grant or deny the request. That's one thing that gets interesting as kids get older and they start to really have their own opinion and a mind of their own, and they're starting to express maybe those things and articulate them a little bit more. When our children are still acknowledging and responding respectfully to the things that we're asking them, but they may have a valid point about, I'm in the middle of reading this book or I'm in the middle of completing this project. Could I complete the request as soon as I finish this? And oftentimes you might grant that request because it seems like a good negotiation and it could be really valid on their part. And that shows that you are respectful and you care about the things that they're interested in. Let's take a look at another example. Let's imagine that a teen approaches you about a family rule she'd like changed. She's done lots of thinking and responding to the concerns you had that caused you to have the rule. She's used critical thinking skills, research skills, and effective, polite communication skills. She approaches you with her request to drop the rule and gives you her well thought out reasons why. Would this be considered non-compliance? This is not non-compliance. This is your teen learning valuable skills that she will use for the rest of her life. She is becoming a critical thinker and an effective negotiator and problem solver. Her display of these skills should be recognized and appreciated. If you respond positively to the proposal, let her know that it was her good use of skills that caused the change in the rule. This will build confidence and maturity in your teen. These are really important critical thinking skills and critical communication skills that our kids are developing. And when they present them really well, it's important that we respond in a way that shows that we value what they have to say and that we're proud of them for the way that they responded. Learning to comply with societal rules is an important task of childhood adolescence. Parents need to actively train their children in this area. You can accomplish this by establishing clear, specific family rules, rewards for compliance, and consequences for non-compliance that are reasonable and related to the situation. Remember, consequences should be delivered consistently in a calm, respectful manner. So now we're going to think about what are some things that teens might consider as a reward. Take a second and write down a few ideas. Some things could include more time to spend with friends, maybe a later curfew within reason, maybe some additional media use, maybe they get to attend parties or other social functions, or maybe they get to go on a shopping spree or you get to buy them something that they've really been wanting. There's a lot of different options. It just kind of depends on what types of interests your specific teenager has and what's going to work well for them. Now let's think about non-compliance and consequences. What are some logical consequences for teens? Some could include privilege loss, like we spoke about last week. This can maybe mean losing time with friends, losing their cell phone privileges, or not going out as much. Another option could be work chores. We're going to take a look at what the definition of work chores are and how we could implement them. So you're going to turn in your yellow workbook to 11.1.2. Work chores are 5-minute tasks that teenagers can be given when they fail to comply with a parental request. Work chores take the place of timeout for older children and teens. So, how many should you give? Work chores should be given no more than twice per request. For example, if the teen refuses to comply with a parental request to wash the dishes, the parent could add one 5-minute work chore, like scrubbing the toilet. If the teen refuses to comply a second time, the parent could add a second work chore, like cleaning the bathroom sink. If the teen still does not comply, the parent should then remove a privilege. So how can I get ready to use work chores? Go around your house and make a list of 5-minute chores that you can use when your teen doesn't comply with requests. Some ideas are scrub a burner on the stove, clean the kitchen or bathroom sink, scrub the toilet, clean a mirror, empty dishwasher, sweep the floor, fold a load of laundry, vacuum the carpet, clean the tub, or clean out the refrigerator. You probably have other things around your house that you can think of right now that would be perfect 5-minute chores for your teens. Anything that will be helpful and that will make a difference, but will also be quick and last around 5 minutes. Next, you can make a list of meaningful short-term privileges to remove that you can also control. Some ideas of privileges to remove are cell phone use for a day, television time for a day, car use or rides to and from places for a day, not having a friend over, or grounding a teen for the day. Tell your teen that if they refuse to comply with your requests, you will assign up to 2 work chores followed by a privilege removal if they continue to refuse. How do I give a work chore? You can practice emotion regulation, breathe deeply, stay calm, even if your teen talks back. Stay calm and focused on what you want to have happen. State your request and don't lecture. If the teen refuses to comply, repeat their request and remind them that if they still refuse to comply, you'll add a work chore. Give a total of 2 work chores for noncompliance. After giving 2 work chores, remove a privilege if your teen still hasn't complied. Stay away from the teen who is doing a work chore. Space for both of you will help eliminate arguments. And when the work chore is over, drop the subject. So you might be wondering, why not give a longer work chore? Long work chores are hard for parents to supervise. If parents don't supervise a long work chore well, and if it doesn't get done or is done poorly, then a new situation arises. A new work chore is probably appropriate. Long work chores can get parents and teens stuck in long and sometimes ugly discipline confrontations. So I would encourage you now to pause the video and write down some ideas of work chores that you could implement in your household. The next thing we're going to do is flip in our purple workbook to 11.1.3, and it's titled Rules for Adolescents. On this, we're going to develop a list of rules specifically for your adolescent. Make sure they're clear and specific and tell the child what to do, not just what not to do. Under each rule, list a consequence for compliance and noncompliance, or that could also be considered a reward if they are compliant. So for example, a rule that I came up with is everyone must be home by 9 p.m. If you're going to be late, you must call and let us know. So it's very straightforward, it's direct, it's a similar rule that I had referred to a couple weeks ago, and I think because this is one that might be pretty common in households that have teens. If your teenager is complying with this rule, one reward could be that if they follow the rule from Sunday through Thursday, then their curfew may be extended to 10 p.m. on Friday and Saturday. So if Sunday night, Monday night, all the way through Thursday, they have followed the rule, they've been home by curfew, they've been respectful in communicating with you on Friday and Saturday, that could be extended to 10 p.m. That could be a reward for them. However, if they don't do that, then their curfew isn't extended. For non-compliance, if they are just not coming home on time or not calling, for every night that they miss their curfew or their curfew is not met, they might lose 1 day of going out privileges. So if they were spending time with friends on Tuesday night and they got home at 9:30 or 10, the next night they will have to be at home and they will have no going out privileges. And so in this situation, since it's a standard rule that is the same every day and every week, they know that if they don't comply, they lose going out privileges. So that's one way that you could use a rule and a consequence. If you ask your kids to, follow some instruction, or you say, hey, can you go help me unload the groceries from the car or something like that, and, they just don't comply or they're not being respectful, that is a time you could implement a work chore as well. So what I'm going to have you do is you may borrow the same rule that I used, or you may come up with one on your own, and then list two more with an appropriate reward and an appropriate consequence that you might think may work well for your children. Go ahead and take a second and fill this out. One thing I will point out is that in certain situations, if you might have ongoing rules, it could just be common knowledge that they lose a privilege upon the first time of not following that rule, especially if it's ongoing. In other situations where they're just not complying with things that you're asking throughout the day, that could be a great time to implement a work chore and have them do 2 of those before doing privilege removal. You can figure out what works best for your kids too, and just kind of figure out what types of consequences and which situations are going to work best for them. The last thing we're going to do is wrap up our learning goal. So my learning goal was I'd like to identify some age-appropriate rules and consequences for my teenager. I was reminded of how important it is to monitor where my teen is when they're out in the community and online to avoid wandering without any adult supervision. I'm going to set more guidelines for my teen when it comes to socializing out in public and online. I want to help her develop her own independence, but in a safe way. You can now take this time to wrap up your learning goal for this week.